Hello, Charlie TCG here, and welcome back to Looking Ahead, the series where I break down and analyze the meta, what's happening in Japan, and how that could impact ours. Today's a super exciting topic. We're going to talk about the comeback mechanics and how much it saved the format in Japan. Cards like Luxray, Iona, and Reversal Energy really have impacted how some of these decks are really adapting and winning over these huge tournaments. We're also going to look at the actual meta, the breakdown from day one and day two, the huge tournament that happened in Japan a few weekends ago, as well as, of course, looking at the City League results and some new cards. Just want to say thank you so much for the support. I'm currently, as recording, 5 subscribers away from 500. So if we can hit that milestone this week, be absolutely incredible. And I'm going to release an amazing video just to commentate how amazing this feels. So without further ado, let's jump in to see the new cards. So there are some pretty interesting ones that have come out. We see Nidoqueen and Nidoking, which we haven't seen in a while, and it's a dark type. And Nidoqueen's really, really cool, but if there's a Nidoqueen on the bench, the attacks cost for no energy, doing 190 damage. So basically a stage 2 version of Drapion it for Mew. So kind of alright, but it's now guaranteed poison. And Nidoqueen has it next turn prevent all damage onto this Pokemon by basic Pokemon. Very interesting cards. Unsure how I can see any competitive players of right now, but loving these artwork and these style. One thing I do like is Hypno, where when you evolve it to a Pokemon, you may choose your Pokemon active Pokemon to be asleep. Really, really cool, as it could really time in for Jinx EX, which is Tudum Kiss, which if it's the active Pokemon is asleep, it is now knocked out. Really, really cool synergy where if you think about an expanded where guaranteed Pokemon could go asleep, like using cards like Hypnotoxic Laser on a coin flip, or Mareep, where I think it's an active both Pokemon are asleep. Really, really interesting cards. And this Hypno having another sleep effect, you get to choose if they could do it from an evolution. It could be pretty powerful. Unsure about using like Scoop Up Nets. It's fortunately rotated. Penny is only for basic, so you have to be multiple of these, and Jinx is to guarantee some KOs. But very interesting cards nevertheless. And we see some other really cool cards as well. Bill's Transfer has been reprinted. This to see a few plays in some World decks back in 2019. Really interesting where you look at the top 8 cards of your deck, fill any number of Pokemon you find that, and put them into your hand. Shuffle the other cards back in your deck. Pretty interesting, but Big Balloon is very interesting because if it's attached to a stage 2 Pokemon, doesn't specify it's a rule box or not, they have no retreat. Think of it like an air balloon, but only for evolution Pokemon. So pretty interesting overall, I would say. And it could be used that we have obviously the Solgaleo back in not in Celebration, which has the Russian effect where if it's on a bench, you can put it to the active. So Solgaleo plus Big Balloon is basically Keldeo Floatstone back in the day, so it could see play, but I'm not too sure. But Zapdos CX, I really like it. It could be a good 1 or 2 off in Miraidon, which Miraidon could maybe step up a bit. The ability Bolt Flow, which if it has any lightning attached to it, has no retreat cost, so that's very strong. And for triple lightning, does 120, and you do 90 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon that has any damage counters on it. Yes, this could seem a bit like it has very situational, but in the late game, this could be really strong where you damage the Pokemon early on, they don't play Manaphy, it's on the bench. You can use this to guarantee gain an extra, potentially, extra 2 to 3 prizes, potentially gain a 5 prize turn. So I really like Zapdos EX, especially for that sort of synergy it could bring to a Miraidon to make it more exciting about how they can get their prizes. And Ditto as well are really interesting for the ability. If this is in the active spot, you can, on your first turn, search your deck for a basic Pokemon, except for Ditto. If you do, discard this Pokemon, all cards attached to it, and put that Pokemon in this place. Think of this in Lost Box decks, where you can shuffle away some Comfies in your deck. You can get more Comfies out and play, which is very interesting, I think, for this style of deck. Good use in control. And I also love how Japan are releasing these cards. They're just releasing them anywhere. So that's why some of these scans aren't particularly too good, because they're just photos. They just put them in their stores. So I really like how they are actually releasing this 151 set. And this Ditto could really see some players, stuff like Control, or decks like you just want to guarantee an easy search for a basic Pokemon, where you can get this Ditto, and then Ditto could turn to any basic Pokemon. Doesn't even specify if it's no rule boxes as well. So I love that. So those are the new cards. I think it was a really powerful, really good sort of start to the set. We could see potentially a very interesting middle set. Like there were a few other cards as well, which I didn't really want to talk about because they weren't as impactful in the meta. But if we look at the City League result, you can see there were a lot of events that did happen, and we could see a huge rise of Giratina Lost Box. This style deck is really creeping up in Japan. It's becoming more and more chance of actually doing really well in the events. Utilizing cards like Spiritomb as well as Super Rod can really help with its consistency and its bad matchups to kind of push your Mew matchup away from playing Drapion. Qianpao is still doing okay, but it's definitely falling away by the wayside. But Miraidon has entered the fray again by being 3.2%. Still pretty low, and even Mew is still not as powerful as it once was, because the comeback mechanics and the high increase of plays of Drapion's in play really is pushing Mew away. Like, it hasn't gained any new cards in the last few sets in Japan, so it's kind of falling by the wayside. But Gardevoir is again back on top. I think Gardevoir is definitely really utilizing the comeback mechanics a lot more. Reversal Energy plus Iona really pushes Gardevoir to really kind of take the back step a few times, and they can all immediately push to get those huge wins later on. Lugia, definitely the single strike package is slowly going away. It goes more the colorless build, utilizing cards like Snorlax, utilizing even Radiant Charizard, or more importantly, the Weirdeer, where you're attacking with Lugia quite early on, and then near the late game, you play a Weirdeer out and play, move all the energies to it because you can use Jet Energy to put it to the active, and get those huge KOs there. And using Luxray, which I showed before, which you can only play if you're behind in prizes, and you can put it straight down on the bench. Really loving these sort of mechanics of these comebacks. But the big surprise, we've talked about it a lot, talked about it last week. It won 2 regionals, but Arceus Giratina is really pushing there to be one of these strong contenders of the list. It's really adapting, like you're playing Alolan Pikachu or Alolan Vulpix. It's kind of crept in, like, or even just a straight Arceus Giratina. It's more of the adapting sort of play. That's why it's performing really well. Because if you have the Arceus can set up anything, Giratina can basically not one-hit KO everything with the choice bar attached with all the concealed gloves. And then it go, right, if I have bad matchups, if I have a bad lost box, or if I have any attacks with abilities, I can just put Alolan Vulpix on, but if I'm worried there's too much basics, I can go to Pikachu. So it's already adapting, like Goodra and Duraludon as well, like it's popping out there, because these are really utilizing the combat mechanics, like Iona. This is why I'm talking about why combat mechanics are saving the meta, because just seeing how much it's changed is absolutely incredible. And I just love that for Pokemon. So what exactly were the top decks? Well, you can see here, Giratina and Lost Box actually got the #1 spot, jumping up 4 places, which is absolutely insane. That's performed that well. And just seeing the results, you can just really tell. Even with Gardevoir in that 2nd place, look at how many results in there. That's gone up. Lost Box did go down 1 place, but kind of definitely going to more of a turbo build, playing more of the Dragonites, more of the potentially cards like Raikou, and even some of them are actually playing the Moltres package, which we talked about last week. Arceus Giratina is back in again at the #4 spot. All the way falling down from the 1st place spot, it's Lugia. Lugia is always going to be one of those which like bumps up and down, so it's nice to see it did go up. And Mew is back in the game, which very much was surprised to see how well its results did, and getting into that 6th spot, which I kind of thought like other decks like Qianpao did actually come in a 7th spot, but very surprised about that. Now, if we just look at what happened in the events of the last big event in Japan, which we talked about last week, we can see already some big increase. Arceus Giratina did really well. All of a sudden, it's now back in these top 6 rankings. Lugia didn't perform too well. It fell down a little bit. Lost Box performed okay, but did in fact fall down a little bit. Giratina, Lost Box actually got only like a top 8 or top 16, and that skyrocketed up. And Gardevoir as well, it both got in the final and the 2nd place, and it shot up again as well. I think really looking into this metagame, I know for us, we're not really usually sold on Giratina and Lost Box. Some people are saying it's S tier, some people are saying it's D tier sort of deck, but everyone's agreeing that Gardevoir is definitely one of the best sort of archetypes. And as we've discussed on the channel, Gardevoir is super, super powerful because it's utilizing so many different sort of archetypes. It can go with the Mewtwo V Union plus Gallade and Reversal Energy to use mainly as 2 prize or potentially stage 2 sort of decks, whereas Giratina constantly has to rely on the Lost Impact attack to constantly be doing 280 damage. I think this is really interesting to see what these top 6 decks are, and I love that it's always changing. The cards which have more of the combat mechanics are increasing, but the ones that make fall flat a tiny bit are slowly falling away. So without further ado, let's jump into some of these lists. Palkia V-Star really did come out, which I really, really like about it. This is a really interesting build, and Palkia did get a couple wins over the weekend, saying goodbye to Qianpao, or sometimes just having Qianpao to utilize it like a capacious bucket sort of situation. But nothing too different about this. Palkia didn't really gain much except the Iona, but really, really interesting to see that this is already starting to evolve. We're seeing 2 different types of water decks, like Palkia as well as the Qianpao version. So I just wanted to give a little touch onto this with utilizing cards like the Cross Switcher as well as Boss try and be a bit more disruptive that way, and higher council switch because you have them very high retreat cost Pokemon. And this was a really interesting Mew list that did, in fact, win, really utilizing, I know I said that quite a bit, the Lost Engine sort of version. We did see a top 8 a couple months back, but this one is really cool. It's having the Chorus Experiment, having the more higher counts of Lost Vacuum and Lost City. You could potentially get to 4 in the Lost Zone very easily, and having Cramomatic and Cramorant as a one prize attacker in his deck, really, really cool, I think, because you can get these big chip damage away, so then Mew don't need to utilize too many of the power tablets or choice belts later on in the game. Cramorant can do this little chip damage in potentially turn 1 and turn 2 and help your Neil matchup that way. So I think I like to see Mew is always adapting. Could we see Lost Mew becoming a more way to play it? Could this be its way back in? I don't know, but you can see some combat mechanics in here like Iona, maybe on a lower count, but really interesting to use this sort of field. And this is the Lugia V-Star deck, which I've been talking about a lot on the channel. And you can see the combat mechanics here. We can see it has Therapy Energy, so Snorlax never falls asleep. The Luxray, which I talked about, which if you're behind in prizes, you can put it down straight onto the bench. And doing 180 damage is really, really cool, especially with 1 copy of Reversal Energy. The only one you need it and attach it for it is really, really cool because you get the 1-hit KO on your Lugias, even Flying Pikachu, as well as some other really cool sort of single prize Pokemon that does 180 damage. So having 4 attackers to do 180 damage is really, really powerful. Having the charm here on Snorlax, buffing up his HP to 200 is really, really good. And again, nothing too crazy to talk about here. We do see the Reversal Energy, we do see Iona. So we've kind of seen the theme now. There's a lot more comeback mechanics are kind of leaking in to see about how good these sort of decks are. And the Gardevoir as well. I think this is very similar to the list that actually did win the event a few weeks ago. But we can see here, high counts of Iona, high counts of Reversal Energy. We're seeing Super Rod, which really helps push these evolving decks much better because you're not utilizing your supporter card like Miriam. So you're maybe potentially going behind in some of your setup or being disrupted because you have to shuffle in your Pokemon. But here, Super Rod is pretty good because you can put up your Pokemon and your energies. So you can use that with Shining Arcana to potentially attach 2 more energies, as well as drawing some extra cards. So I really like Gardevoir. I think it's really, really good. As you've noticed, Champions Festival isn't really going to be appearing as much. Well, Champions Festival is like a $1,000 card over there in Japan. So we're not going to see it appear as frequently. It's a lot more easier to get hold of over here as there's multiple different languages players can play with. So we can see how this could adapt in like next month when the set's out, which is insane. But Gardevoir EX is really, really powerful, especially with this one. And this one here is a list which did in fact get top 16, I believe, in the huge tournament in Japan. But this one got top 4, and it's a very interesting build. Like I said, this focuses a lot more on stage 2 Pokemon. We're seeing the big counts of the Shining Arcana and the 2 things of Gallade. I really like this because we can see not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 copies of Reversal Energies and 3 copies of Iona. Very, very disruptive, as well as that Luxray. So this is going to have so many stage 2 sort of Pokemon. It's a much more different strategy to Gardevoir. You have Mewtwo for the late game, which is really, really good. But trying to be behind in prizes, that's why you can play the Mirage Step Curlier. You can really use a big impact about how strong Versatile Energy is. Your Luxray can really help your Lugia matchups. Your Gallade can really help with any decks which are weak to fighting types. But wait, what's really popular right now? Arceus and Miraidon, kinda, but those can get hit for weakness there. And you've got the Gallade to get the Buddy Catch, so you can get any of the supporters you may want to have. So because you're playing so many of these stage 2 Pokemon, you need to play a high count of Super Rod, so you can constantly be reusing all these attacks. So I really like this style of sort of deck. It's so creative, so different. Peonia, so you can get your Mewtwo pieces if you need to, if you fall behind. And you have Zinnia's Resolve to help with that discarding, get the Mewtwo pieces, get the Psychic Energies. I think it's a really cool sort of list and really, really interesting to see it grow, especially really utilizing the combat mechanics. Could we see this as how Gardevoir is adapting? That's why I always like to see it change. And this is the Lost Box decks, which again is utilizing these Luxray. You're kind of seeing it pop up quite a lot. Like it has a lot of HP and does 180 damage. Nothing really to snuff at. So that's the only real big combat mechanic you've seen in this Lost Box. I just want to showcase about how much Lost Box is really sort of adapting and changing. Not many new cool toys to play with, but having these combat cards can really push Lost Box to maybe be a bit more creative at times to try and like keep up with it. Because yes, you had the Roxanne, which would be really devastating, but now we're seeing potentially Iona, which going down to one card is really, really detrimental. And looking at Lost Zone Giratina, this one is a very interesting build because it plays a high account of Roxanne to Iona, so you want to be a bit disruptive more of a late game, and it has a huge high increase in your Giratina, playing a 4-3 line. One of the thickest line I've seen in a Giratina in a very long time. Normally you see a 3-3 line or potentially a 2-3 line if you want to really go with attacking with Giratina, but Giratina V has a really, really good attack and so one. And having Jet Energy as well, this is really boosting Lost Box to be as powerful as possible because you're getting that extra switching card. You're attaching the energy, which can fuel up your Giratinas, and also getting that switch or even that retreat option, which Lost Box always desperately needs. And I think this is the last list we've got to talk about today. This is Arctina, which is evolving into it. We're seeing a normal line of Arceus, the normal line of Giratina, but we're seeing a 1-1 line of Alolan Vulpix. We did see this deck, in fact, win, I forget, the tournament over in EUIC, and it's really, really powerful to shut down being damaged from any Pokemon that have an ability on it. I love this style of deck. I think it's really, really good and creative to kind of see Arceus Giratina is always going to address any of the threats which are in the room. If it's basics, they're going to play a high account of Pikachu. If it is an ability Pokemon, they're going to play Alolan Vulpix. So kind of got to see it's Lost Box or Gardevoir the most popular choice, and you can go around with that. You could even play this style of deck now. It's good to see it is adapting right now, but this is going where some Arceus Giratinas are playing. And the rest of it, we are seeing some other cool combat mechanics here. We're seeing high accounts of Iona. We're seeing Box of Disaster, which is a really, really cool tech, which allows you to, with Psychic Pokemon, and not, I think, put some damage counters on it. So you're going around with a DM Pokemon if it goes attacking to it. So I really like that sort of deck. The Squawkability as well is really good to really help set up this deck to make it as quick as possible. And being high disruptive with the high counts of Path and Boss, as well as Sharon's Care, is really, really good. So you can constantly be reutilizing your Arceus. And if they try and Boss stall with Barrel, you can bench that Pokemon up if they damage it. I really, really like this sort of deck. I think it's good to see Arceus Giratina really start to adapt. So now let's talk about the day one meta. And we can really see that the top 3 decks in the format at that time was Gardevoir, Lugia, and Xianpao. And then if you combine Lost Box together, all of them, it's really, really the top 4 decks. There's no surprise about Xianpao. It's always the big sort of deck which comes out of the format, which people think, yes, it's amazing, I'm going to play it. And that's why it has a higher increase of play. Whereas cards like Lugia and Gardevoir, those are, sorry, those are known decks to be really, really strong. So those are always going to be a high account. They know Gardevoir gains so many new toys. They know Lugia is much stronger now as a colorless version. That's why we've seen a huge count of these. Lost Box, so having the dip below Xianpao was definitely a surprise, but obviously if you combine the two together, they're much higher. But even here, Arceus V-Star with Giratina had a high count of it as well. Even with Goodra as well had a bit of a high percentage as well. But Mew and Miraidon were really on the backbone. They fell quite a bit down. They didn't get the high percentage-wise as we have always seen in these tournaments. So Mew really taking the back leg because it didn't gain any new toys. We could see it bounce back after the 151 set or potentially the set after that. But right now, I don't think Mew is in a really, really good spot. Xianpao, I really like it, did get 10%. It showed that people did trust the deck. But how did that convince into day 2? So let's just have a look. We can see Xianpao fell down to only 4.7%, whereas cards like the Lost Box decks, Mew had a huge increase. Lugia as well as Gardevoir had these massive, massive increases in play, even of Arceus Giratina. So it's good to see we're seeing these big increases in the deck. But Miraidon disappeared. That was a very deck which I thought could do well. And Xianpao had a huge drop, which means it didn't have the best conversion rate. We're seeing, we're seeing Gardevoir have a huge increase. We're seeing Lost Box decks really having these big increase in decks, like with Goodra and Giratina, which I'm liking to see. People are going with either the tank and heal or potentially the big one-hit KOs. This is very much something which you can think about. If you're testing for NAIC, if you're looking at new decks and go, what should I really invest in Xianpao? Which the answer could be yes. But right now, it didn't perform really well in the tournament. It fell. It was the third most played deck, to then fell down to be only 4.7%. Kind of looking at it that way, like it's more played in other ways, and then it drops away. So it's really difficult to see, like, until we have the Japan Championships, which is, in fact, a couple of weeks away, we can really test and see how the meta is really evolving. But right now, Comeback card mechanics, which are utilized in Lost Box, Lugia, and Gardevoir, were on the increase, where these big aggro sort of aggressive cards like Miraidon and Xianpao will fall in a little bit by the wayside. So this was very much interesting to see how the day 2 shaped up, how the meta is going to evolve. And if we just look ahead, is Giratina now back? Giratina has definitely gotten a huge comeback by getting top 4, placing pretty well in the last couple of weeks in the regionals and city leagues. Giratina could be here to stay. It's always been those tier 1 to tier D sort of cards. So I really like how Giratina is properly back in the meta because of comeback cards. They've saved the format. I really think that is the case. I think that's such a good thing right now. And it's so healthy for the meta. How could this change going forward? Well, we could see comeback cards really kind of push Gardevoir and Lost Box decks to be much more higher, or they could be much more the target of the evolving meta, and they could really fall a little bit by the wayside. Similar like Xianpao and Miraidon. Miraidon has really fallen off. It hasn't even got in the top 6 decks. Again, didn't even get a single win this week at the City League, so it did happen. So how could this affect the meta going forward? I think we're just going to see a much more higher count of Gardevoir and Giratina decks, whether it be with Lost Box or Arceus. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video of looking ahead. If you do, please make sure to like and subscribe. I'm so close to 500 subscribers and the support is honestly insane. So thank you so much for that. If my name is Chai TCG, I'm going to be back again in a couple of days' time showcasing more deck profiles in this new format, or potentially my 500 subscriber special. I will see you guys later. Bye for now.